Let's start our business of shaping policy for today by looking at the US ban on computer chips to China. This rivalry has been on for years. The rivalry between the US and the China is assuming another dimension. This time around, it's about advanced computer technology to China, the ban on this technology. As much as the US Secretary of State has acknowledged that this decision is not meant to up or to curb China's economic development, what has been the impact of these on the economic growth in China? That will be the thrust of our conversation. And I'm being joined by in-house analyst, the Vice President of Femi Wash Media Limited, and the Vice President of the iRadio, that's the latest in town, Dr. Idahosa Osamhanze. Glad you have you join us this morning.
My pleasure, Femi. Good Nigeria. Good, Femi.
How was your weekend?
Well, weekend is always
Busy as
busy
usual.
as usual, so we're here.
Great. Glad you have you join us once again.
My pleasure.
Last week we talked about this economic rivalry between the US and China. This time around, we're looking at another development, even though it's not a recent one. It's been on for like years now. The the control by the US on the shipment of sensitive computer technologies to China. This started during Trump's administration, where the US feel there's a need to control the shipment of this sensitive AI to China. What do you make of this development, and what has been the impact on the export market as far as the US and China is concerned?
Well, the battle for superiority continues, and as every economy globally struggle for survival, collaboration seems not working, and so here, deep competition is what you see. Uh, I am not too sure how deeply this is going to affect the Chinese market, as it were, because China is also developing internal capacity and competencies in around these areas. So countries are looking out. If things are working well for you, you look for alternative. Like they say in international relations and politics as a whole, what matters is interest. No permanent friend, no permanent enemy. So, American ban on the shipment of chips to China, it's a trade strategy to see how they can also uh, reduce or limit the capacity of the Chinese industry that's already overproducing without putting consideration on its local market. So, control, as it were, so that you can have a balance. And I remember that when the foreign secretary, the trade secretary visited China last time, she was quite very convinced that there's a need to really monitor what China is doing so that you don't create a total global distortion of the economy. And I think that's where we are. And China will survive, I sure know that.
Now, this has been of concern, and to the extent that even some stakeholders had to raise some questions. And in a bid to answer that, the US Secretary of State Blinken said, this is not to hurt China's. In fact, I would love to quote him. He says, this is not intended to impede China's economic or technological progress. But he emphasized that the focus remains on safeguarding sensitive technology rather than restricting trade. Now, the idea, as he has explained, is to safeguard some sensitive technologies that, the concern might be that if it gets out of control, it might put the world into jeopardy. So the concern here is of national threat or national peace, to ensure that the world cohabits together and there's a kind of control on this sensitive AI materials. What's your take on this?
This is just a diplomatic language.
It sounds like that of
Yes,
politician.
yeah, that's the way politician talks, and Blinken is a politician for that matter. So he's just being diplomatic to say yes, of course. You even when, of course, like I said, the trade secretary visited China, she was so emphatic about it, and that is to say that look, we need to balance production so that the economy is not tilted toward one direction. So what the Americans are doing is looking that China is leveraging, of course, taking advantage of its technology, and they are driving production. And of course, like they said, it's like a hyper-productive economy as of today. And what that means is putting pressure on other economies in the world. And that is because of goods coming out of China that are cheaper than whatever you can find anywhere else. So they're becoming more competitive. What that means is that if the factories in America, the factories in Japan, the factories in Europe are all closing down because everybody had to buy from one. So what you enter into is a global monopoly. And that will not be safe for the world. Safe in the sense that as people are losing jobs, crime wave will increase, definitely. And people will be subject to taking offers that they naturally would not have taken. And you will see the spread of terrorism globally, and that will mean a nightmare for the world. And so to find a safe world where everything is peaceful, then of course, in terms of sharing the world resource, there has to be some form of equity where you live and let's live. This is the situation that the Americans are painting. But we know from experience that yes, it's because they are becoming less competitive and they are also struggling to survive. That for me is what is in for the Americans is that America must necessarily, as a matter of urgency, uh, look at its liberal policies and see how they can really empower capitalism to drive productivity in its environment. I keep saying that the situation whereby world government are thinking that they can solve poverty by being parents to full-blown adults that can work, for me, it's a disincentive for productivity. And this is what liberal democracy has done to the world, where people are cap in hand, always looking for resource. Yesterday, I was speaking in the church and I said to the congregation, you see, we have a problem in our hand, and then, of course, we are looking up to government. And what is this problem? It is the problem that there's lack of productivity in the system. And so while you're complaining that exchange rate is high, why would exchange rate be high when we are not productive? And none of us is looking for government to send us handouts of 50,000 every month and without work. In short, in Gandhi's word, one of the seven social sins is work without work. So I think the world must encourage work, which is important. So from theological perspective, I said to them, God is a worker. And therefore, we have to work. In short, we even say in church, and God don't sleep, which means he works both night and day. And so if God is working night and day, why will human being be sleeping day and night and expect prosperity to abound? It can't happen. So this is where democracy has really wounded the productivity power of the world. So we need to be able to retune that and let people point people attention to where they can become productive. And think that's where the survival of the American society really lies. So because as long as you continue to support people, you are giving them a credit card to live a life that is not their own, then you create a distortion in your economy. So trade war will not solve any problem. And of course, I know that China must also be thinking of a retaliation. God help Africa.
All right, but don't you think the argument on the part of U.S. Secretary of State it's something to go by? Because globally, when it comes to AI, the concern globally is about control. And the concern also is about if these technologies get to the wrong hand or they are being deployed wrongly, it could be of national threat to the whole world. So, don't you think, on the part of the US Secretary of State, going with this argument and the narrative that there's a need to control these sensitive computer chips to China, it's something to go by?
Well, it's unfortunate that uh, we can sit down in a room and we'll be determining who is matured and not matured. among nation states, which of course has been the conversation. If you've been a follower of the talk on, for example, of nuclear development power, this is one of the arguments that the American also put forward in this sort one, sort two conversation on the fact that there are some people who do not have the maturity to handle nuclear, and therefore they should not be allowed to have nuclear access. It's the same conversation here. But what do you get from this point is the fact that you have access to the nuclear power makes you really superior to other people, so you can remain the international policeman of the whole world. So if you're controlling the military, you also need to control the economy. And now that, of course, the world is driven by chips and the world is driven by artificial intelligence and we're in a knowledge age, and then, of course, you also want to monopolize it. And you don't want it spread. But you, on the other hand, saying to the person who is producing, I say, stop producing so that we can grow, but we don't want to give you this so that you don't get into the wrong. And I don't think that's a valid argument. It's a selfish argument in my own ranking. And I think that by now, too, those people would have been perfecting their technology to be able to develop their own chips. And I think China must be at a close end in that direction. So what it is for me is that the world must come to that point where everybody come to the table with a clean hand. And like they say, if you go to equity, your hands must be very clean. And people must see that you are preaching what you are doing what you're preaching. And if you're not doing that, then there's a problem. But I feel that this is a supremacy war between China and the US. And it's nothing that will abate anytime soon.
But how do you see China responding to this? What might likely be the possible reaction from China, knowing fully well that some US companies were given exceptions? It's important to know that, exceptions as regards these export of sensitive AI materials to China. Some of these companies were given the preference as against some of these Chinese companies. So how do you see China responding to this?
Well, like Newton law says, to every action, there's always equal and opposite reaction. And to the extent to which you have hurt me, I'll go ahead also to hurt you. So I think it's trade. It's trade, it's strategy. People are looking at it. So if you're blocking me this end, what else will I do? So China also must be thinking on their strategy to respond appropriately, because they're not going to fold their hands. They're looking for alternative, and the alternative as we speak, really, because it's not all about America. And so when you have opportunity elsewhere, and these are things that you can actually leverage. And I think this is where really Africa need to wake up to become an alternate market to these struggling powers. So that if these people are fighting, we can just be here and then raking the money in if we can think excessively. And I shared this with young people yesterday, and I said to them, you see, nobody is looking at your color, nobody is looking at where you come from. Your superiority in terms of thinking and using your mind is what is important. So if you break a new ground and say, look, I have a solution to a world problem, the whole world will channel their energy toward you, and that'll make you richer. And this is what is possible. I think that's for me, really, Africa need to position. So as these global powers are fighting, and then we can feast on it while we remain neutral.
Let's go there. Since you've started now, how can Africa benefit from this? First of all, let's establish who is on the receiving side, looking at the rivalry between the US and China as regards this development. Don't forget what happened recently about TikTok. This looks like a reflection of it. And now, who is on the receiving side? One, then two, let's look at the impact of these on Africa. If the US is trying to restrict the control of these sensitive technologies to China, I don't think Africa will be given a preference.
Well, there's no preference for Africa because as it is now, we don't produce cheap. We're only consumers of cheap. What that means is that you create artificial scarcity in China, and that affects the price of goods that are shipping out elsewhere. Because the chip is not consumable, it's consumable in the factory. It's not something that you eat, so you have to use to produce something. And the bigger market for Chinese, as you speak, there is Africa. So they ship this thing back to Africa. But if there is scarcity here and you are restricting this thing, so what means is that the law of demand and supply, as the supply is thinning down, the demand increasing, of course, prices have to skyrocket. And so which means Africa will need to pay more.
Interesting. But What could be a way, like a buffer for this kind of development if we have to look inward, for some of these sensitive materials? As far as technology, when it comes to Africa, we're still developing, if I may use that word. Now, with this development, could there be any form of buffer locally to be able to withstand this kind of development or the looming development that may be coming from this rivalry between the US and China?
Well, I don't know where the buffer is going to come from Africa, because we are the most pitied continent in the world, because we have not taken the bull by the horn in terms of investing in
We
it.
shouldn't be the most pitied. We are largely blessed when it comes to resources.
Well, that is in potential, but it's not in actual. So you are blessed in potential. You are rich in potential. The fact that you are rich in potential will not take you to the supermarket and take goods home until that potential is translated into actuality. This is the issue, and this is where, for me, really, I said somebody yesterday, we need as Africa and to stop this bickering over politics and concentrate on the real thing that matter. The world is driven by knowledge today. How much are we going to invest in terms of our education system? This is, for me, the real area where we need to have concern. And I was saying, look at it. We read in the papers last week that even common jam, for a child to pass jam, a parent had to go sit a jam for his son. And that's an eyesore. And this tells you the extent of the moral degradation in our society, because we're chasing just paper qualification and people are not working hard to see how we can actually earn some skills and competence when we go to school. This for me is really issues. And I've had this argument with a lot of people, and they keep putting this blame on government is not funding education, government is not funding education. I don't think it's really funding education. The problem is our mental laziness and our ability to sit down, whether as lecturers or students, to develop models, things that will work. Now, I'm just imagining, for example, we have a school system that is functional, and you have over 200 students in a particular discipline. Maybe it's a computer, maybe it's engineering, maybe it's agriculture, and you're aggregating these 200 people and giving them assignments to prove a point. That will not cost government any money. But what do we see here? We see students from time to time write projects and photocopy what has been written before, and then we go submit, and then we say we have finished university, and then they give us a certificate. So this is a problem. Whereas elsewhere in the world, where people are writing theses, people are writing proposals, they actually ask to do projects, and what that means is that they are sent to a company having developed a prototype, a model, to go to a company to go and develop a prototype and see how it works. I have a friend of mine whose work was to work on the wristband to monitor heart rate for his engineering master's program in Germany. Done the design and drawing, he was taken to a company for 6 months to sit down so that they can build the prototype and see how it can function. That's what functional education is.
Did you say 6 months?
Yes.
Interesting.
So you sit down and the company is producing this model to see how it works. There's this K-Lab and Farm Lab in Rwanda. I was there the other day and I saw where children are designing models for robotics. And right there on the other side in the fabrication lab, you are seeing where people are fabricating robotics. So knowledge translating into solution. And these robotics are going to be used in the airport to carry load rather than use the trolley as it were. So all these are designs that people are thinking the problem in the environment, how can we solve it? This is the only buffer that Africa can get if the big economies are fighting. If we don't deliberately develop ourselves and we are waiting for the crumbs that is falling from the master's table, then of course we will remain the most pitied continent.
Now, looking at this development between China and the US, we talked about this economic rivalry between these two countries.
Oh, yes.
Now it's assuming another dimension. Last week we talked about trade restrictions. Now it's all about the sensitive AI materials, the deployment to the Chinese market. What do you make of this?
Well, like you mentioned, it's a rivalry, and America though has some concerns, but basically it's about the rivalry. And I think this would not only affect China because the chips are used for different devices, in fact, computers, smartphones, basically electronic materials, and so even for development of military weapons and all. But let's see what China would do. It looks like an interesting one because it never seems to end. When you think, oh, it's about TikTok in the US, it's about this, it's about that. It's either China is coming or the US is coming. But from what it looks, it seems like the US is most times on the attack. Why China is defending. But hey, we've got Osamhanze who's here to help us look at the issues. It seems like in this rivalry or in this fight, the person's always quick to throw the punch is US. Now, is this from fear or is the concern of the US genuine? And how will this affect the global supply chain, being that not only China makes use of these chips, other products? What will be the effects on electronics and other products that are even cars that these chips are used for?
Like I've mentioned earlier in this conversation, in international politics, what is important is the fact that nations are after the welfare and the well-being of its citizens. And that is what is uppermost in their mind. You're not going to be judged by your citizens by how friendly you were to foreign nations. When it's time for election, which is, of course, to appraise your scorecard for the term that was given to you. And don't forget that the Americans are in the election year right now, and people are going to go to the polls in November to give either a vote of confidence or vote of no confidence on the regime. And this is quite important, and we must understand the timing of these restrictions and bans to say, okay, well, because of course it's going to be a huge point for the Republicans in terms of conversation and how would they try to build the economy. When Donald Trump was there, and what mileages that they made in terms of promoting the interest of the American business and see how business in America survive. And of course, if you follow the trend in the campaign so far, you'll see that Republicans have been saying, oh, all the gains we made in 4 years, in these last 4 years, they've been overturned because of the bad policies of this regime. So you can also look at it in the light of the politics of the American right now, that the current president would need to also need to win some mileage from economic decisions that are tough, that people will say, oh, well, he's doing well and he deserves a second term. So these are the issues that are playing out at the moment. But like I said, every time the elephants fight, the grass will have to pay for it. And this is not just for the global market, because products that are coming from China also come into the American market. So if you create artificial scarcity, which of course will put price up, then of course you also hurting your local market. So that also must be put into focus.
All right. Now, in this case, do you see China developing their own technology to produce chips? Well, for the semiconductor material, Japan is taking the lead. But do you see a kind of partnership between Japan and China, or China by itself looking for ways to break away from the monopoly the Americans seems to have over this?
Well, semiconductor, Japan, Taiwan is actually the powerhouse of semiconductor. 61% of the entire semiconductor market is in Taiwan. One company, TSMC, is actually holding about 51% of that market, and it's located headquartered in Taiwan. What Japan is trying to do is also to play in that market, and so they are investing heavily to see whether they can secure 1 or 2% of that market size of the semiconductor. Yeah, but like China, from day one, will also be developing their internal capacities, and that is what they are known for. You see, reverse engineering is what China will do always. They would have been working on their local technology because they're also playing there later. They have about 1 or 2% in terms of that market also. So it's not to say that they're going to start afresh. They could be expanding what is coming. And most of the time when these things are imported, it's not because they are not local substitute. It's just to be able to support the and feed the factory, as it were, when what you're getting from local companies are not enough to drive the production in the factory. So you don't have downtime. So you can import. Just like you see in America importing crude. They have crude. So they are not importing crude because they don't have, but they are also putting in the reserve so that for tomorrow, storing for tomorrow in case there are crises or emergencies or things like that. So I think that happened to every country. So China must also be working their strategy, and I know that they will not be sleeping.
Now let's look at the business side of this because that's always the priority when it comes to our conversation here. For genuine manufacturers who need these sensitive chips for their products, producing electric vehicles, laptops, and other sensitive material, AI materials, what will be the impact of these on their businesses?
Well, trade control is not new, and it's serious weapon is sale. You deliberately withhold to create artificial scarcity so you can scale up price. Because it's common law of demand and supply. So if your demand is high and the supply is not uh, equivalent, then of course you are tempted to say, okay, you want to increase your price. So, and if you increase your price, of course, people who want it will have to pay more for it. That, of course, is normal in sales. And of course, it's a non-global sales strategy. People don't, they deliberately have to keep some and create some measure of artificial scarcity. That happens in sales. So what happens is that, of course, you see the price of input increasing, and which is what my argument is this morning. So as the price of input increases, the price definitely of the products that are coming out of those inputs will also increase. Now, in a world where we are struggling with poverty, people disposable income weakening by the day, and you'll see that that puts further pressure on the people, which is the point I'm trying to drive. So, which means people will not be able to afford, or even if they are going to afford, they'll be paying more, and that will be reducing their buying power to even buy luxury or things that may be there. And if these sales are not happening, then you find that there's also a boomerang effect of this on the factories, because if you produce something that people cannot buy, then of course you will have to pay the price of keeping them in the warehouse. Have you? And so that creates a lot of issues for you. So this is where it is at the problem. So if care is not taken, that can also affect the productive factory and then reduces the ability to make profit. And then the companies are shrinking. Then you are finding more people out of job. And the cycle go on and on.
All right, let's move away from the China and the US workers. It never ends. By tomorrow, it will be China retaliating and coming up with something that the US too will have to then retaliate to. So, Nigerian government is planning a $10 billion fund, diaspora fund, to attract investment from Nigerians living abroad. Now, it's called for bids from fund managers for this, which will be channeled to different sectors. What do you make of this? Do you think a lot of Nigerians in diaspora will welcome this warmly?
Well, government is trying to also speak to people and then assure people that the uh, ease of doing business is getting better, and that when you do investment, you will be able to make profit. To what extent that people are going to believe government is a completely different ballgame. Uh, if you tell me that, say, okay, bring your money and come and invest in my economy, I'm also watching the data and statistics that is coming out from the market and see, is it encouraging? Is it where I want to put my money? So there's still so much instability. Government will create that platform, but whether people will subscribe is a different ballgame. And that's because people are also looking at the condition at home to be sure that when you bring in a resource, that resource will what is why. Take for example, a lot of people who were thinking that, oh, bringing dollar in at a month ago would have been looking at it that, oh, that would be profitable bringing it because now you have a free market. And then in the last 2 weeks, you see the dollar tumbling. And the perceived value of this investment in their head is also going down because there's no stability. And I think that will work if our macro's um, economic framework stabilizes and you have rate stabilizes and you're having uh, whether lending rate, whether exchange rate, inflation rate, and everything coming to stabilize. And also seeing that a whole lot of productive activity is going on in the country, and there's a lot of productivity. People are being employed, they're armed with disposable income. All this will be the incentive for people living abroad to bring their money home. And like everybody will know, there's no nationalism in this. There's no patriotism about this that I have to bring my money home if it's not going to make profit. The only sure way to attract such funds is to create an enabling environment where those funds can actually make profits, and then the actual owner of those profits can see that it is possible. And if that feasibility is not seen, it may be difficult for you to really get people to subscribe to such a project.
Now, according to the World Bank, the diaspora remittances for the year 2023 was to the tune of $20 billion. That's just an increase compared to 2022. Would you say in the last 1 year, Nigerians in diaspora, they have cause to be patriotic, or rather they have confidence in the present administration? And that's why it has led to that increase. Could it be more of patriotism or having confidence in the present administration compared to the past?
We can. It's neither here nor there, really. People who work outside, some of them have families here, and you know the sentiments of so many Nigerians. The first thing is to think you want to build a house for your father or for your mother. You want to build your own house. You want to do investments so that when you come back home, because they already know where they are no citizens there, and they are coming back home anyway. And then you must find a way to see how much of things that you are going to put in your environment. But for me, I see it not really because there's anything that the regime has done that will attract people to come to put money in it, except that people are also looking at the global situation as it is today is actually changing. And it's not a one country issue. So people are even thinking, why am I here in the first place? You know the parable they say in scripture, they call the parable of the prodigal son, and say, oh, people in my father's house, the slaves there, they are eating very well. Here am I feeding with swine. So let me return back to my father. So this, of course, calculations are also there, and we don't need to ignore those sentiments. That, of course, also may have been having impact on the level of remittances that is coming. So a lot of factors could really account for it. But I don't think significantly maybe that people are investing more in the government. Of course, because we also see really the stock markets have done well in in the last 1 year really, and people are also believing, and of course, investment is also increasing in that direction. So, but let's see how it plays out.
Now, you just mentioned the stock market. If this diaspora fund was channeled towards that, expanding the stock market and asking Nigerians in diaspora to come buy shares in the various companies trading at the Nigerian Stock Exchange, do you think it would have been a better way to attract investment than asking for investments in sectors like healthcare, education, and it's going to be put in infrastructure and entrepreneurship. This seem more like public projects, and so the chances of the investors recouping their fund is doesn't is not glaring and not attractive enough to the investors. What would you have recommended for an investment plan like this?
No, investment is investment. I think it's not a real service. Say if you are saying come invest in the education sector, so there's a gap. Take for example, the professor Lord was saying the other day that of all the people who took JAM in 2024, the 2023-24 academic session, that only 20% of them will be admitted, because that's the space that can be accommodated by both the private universities and the public universities. So which means that there is a gap. And if anybody putting money there, of course, chances are that they are going to have some returns. Now, there's also a gap in the health sector, because you have public health facilities that are not functional as they should be. And government may not have so much money to invest in that sector. But they're asking, oh God, those in diaspora to please bring in money into that sector. It doesn't mean that the healthcare will be run for free. It's saying that there's a vacuum here that can mean business for you. If you invest in it, you're going to get money. Even if it's basic infrastructure, like, for example, roads and all these things, the government is also opening up, which, of course, is saying, oh, if you invest in a road project, I was listening to Mahi the other day when he was talking about the coastal road, and he said they're going to tow it at two end. And if they tow it at two end, and of course they're going to charge a tow fee of about 3,000, between 3,000 5,000 at both end. And whoever uses that facility pay, that they have done their calculation by volume that people will fly that place. In 15 years, the cost of constructing that road, they will be able to recover it. So this is where government is saying that there's opportunity, bring in your money. You can recoup it. You can actually make profit by bringing it. So I don't think it's a kind of social investment.
Okay, but when they bring in money, the government has a duty to ensure they get back their money. So what would that mean for access to healthcare in Nigeria, access to education when it becomes profit driven?
Well, in terms of access, and this is what people talk about PPP. If you put a PPP arrangement in place, a whole lot of people will now decide on where they want to be, either to pay priority or to stay on the queue, whichever. So that choice is yours. I went to submit documents in an embassy on Wednesday, and I got there and I said, oh, I have to fill online assistance service, and I paid for it. And I got there, I saw people who said, oh, we want self-service, I don't want to pay online. And they upload their document themselves. So it's a choice. So, but the fact that alternatives are possible, are valuable, and you want a quick service, you want good treatment, and the opportunities are there. So rather than travel abroad to do tourism, you have those opportunities here that retain money in here. So I don't think it has anything to do with access. So what that means is that even those who have money that used to queue on the public facility can move for faster services, and then those who don't have money, their queue reduces by some quota. So this is for me what it is. It's a win-win for everybody.
Let me do a follow up on the question asked earlier by Blessing. If this $10 billion diaspora fund is something to go by, what do you think should be the priority for the federal government now in pitching to investors? What area, what sectors should be of priority? You want to pitch, the federal government is in position to pitch to investors now to come into Nigeria using this fund as a target. In your own estimation, what sectors do you think the federal government should prioritize? You talked about the knowledge gap and when investment could be channeled into. So, what sectors do you think should be prioritized?
I've always argued the rationale for government is to moderate the struggle for resource between the haves and the have-nots, and then create an enabling environment for mutual survival for both. And that's why you see somehow you task businesses, and then of course so that they can produce goods and services that will be affordable and accessible to the people in your space. So what government role should be is that moderation role, creating that enabling environment for healthy competition. And that's why I said earlier, it's not just about floating a bond or asking people to come do investment. Because those who are going to do investment, like I always say, consumers are rational beings. They can think. They call it in decision making a rational choice theory, that everybody think before they will take a particular decision. So what are going to be the scientific basis for this decision making is to calculate, if I bring in my money, is it safe? Can government protect it by stable policies? So these are the things that people are going to be looking at. They are going to be looking at, for example, the enabling environment, the security architecture. Is it getting better now? That you are having to be here and you feel safe physically. So I think those are the things that government should concentrate on. Logistics issues. Are there good roads? Do we have better facility in terms of port facility to also enhance receipt of goods that are imported into the country, bringing in machinery? How many months will it take? The glitches on the seaport, they all go in there. Thank God that, of course, the president also had gotten some 600 million US dollars for port facility development in this last trip. So it is to see that we invest in those basic infrastructure, that if the environment is right, you don't need to beg people. They will bring in their money for investment.
What about transparency, ensuring transparency of the fund managers and even the process so that confidence starts and then it stays the whole process? Because many of these investors will not be able to come and live in Nigeria the period of investment, which ranges from between 3 to 10 years, depending on the investment plan that they would take. Some of them want to remain where they are currently working, but have their investment here. What should be done to ensure transparency and accountability from the fund managers?
Well, I think, again, government is doing its well. If we were to actually judge from what we have seen in the last 9 months or thereabout of this regime, they have demonstrated a lot of goodwill in terms of putting the cards on the table for everybody to see. But also realize that the fact that they're asking this thing to happen is not that they're asking government to come and warehouse this fund. That must also be very clear. It's
The
not.
government will bring together those who will warehouse the funds.
Yeah, they're not necessarily going to be government staff who's going to manage this fund. So Zola is saying that, look, we have windows open, funds can actually come in here, and then investment can happen in these sectors. So some of these investments actually may be within the private sector. So the investor is looking at the character, the competence, and the commitment or consistency of those boards, those institutions where this fund is coming into. And that, of course, will help them to make their choice.
Now, the federal government is planning to issue what they call diaspora bonds later this year. The essence of this is to attract more foreign flows into the country. Do you think this will further increase, the inflow into the country and proper investment into the nation?
Oh yes, definitely so. Definitely so. So a lot of people are looking at it's also the incentive you put on the bond that will also determine. So if there's a good margin on it, and you see people can shift from investment, just understand this one philosophy that every businessman is looking for profit, and wherever he sees profit and is guaranteed that the risk are not too high, the person is definitely going to put some money in there. So that's what business is all about. Business is about profit making. So if you tell me you are floating a bond, I'm going to look at it, do the calculation, XYZ. If I put it in this market in this country, or I put it in my own country, where am I going to get the best of value? That will inform the decision. So the government is insisting, oh, they want to have to float the bond in foreign currency. Yes, this of course will be good again. It will further send liquidity into the foreign exchange market. That you are going to see people who bring in more dollar into the economy, and that further will strengthen the power of naira against the dollar. Because if you have more dollar in circulation, then there'll be no pressure to push price up.
So, if Nigeria is rallying around domestic investors or its own people living abroad to invest, what impact would this have on foreign investment, foreign direct investment from those who are not of Nigerian descent?
It's not about Nigeria alone. Of course, like the president has said, it's a time without number in all his travel. We are open for business. So the government is not just talking only to foreign investors alone. And I remember in one of the occasions, the president says, look, what are we saying here? We are not really saying that uh, uh, come and help us. We can actually help ourselves because we have a lot of people who have the wherewithal to help ourselves. But what we are simply saying is that come, we are open and we can be as competitive as anybody. So we are not really begging you to come, but we are showing you that there's opportunity in our country. Come and put your money in here. So it will just really be competitive. You can imagine the kind of trust that will engender in the heart of the foreigners to see that your citizens are willing to take their money home. That will further lend credibility to the system. So if I'm asking a German to come invest in Nigeria, and Nigerians who are having money in Germany are not coming here to invest, then that will create some suspicion. And people say, oh, is there something that the citizens of this country are seeing that we are not seeing? But if we see that the citizens of Nigeria are bringing in money, that of course will raise the confidence of the foreigner to want to also come do business in the environment. That if these people can feel secure bringing their money back home, I think our own also will be secure. So for me, it's going to really create more credibility than really shrink the foreign direct inflow.
All right. To further, increase the inflow of FX into the country, apart from depending on Nigerians in diaspora, what can the federal government do locally? If you have to look inward now, the federal government is to look inward. What are the local alternatives in increasing the FX flow into Nigeria? You're aware that the highest we will often get is from crude oil, which is also on the decline when it comes to production. What are other areas that the federal government can look into to be able to increase FX inflow into the country?
I think in the last 8 years, really, to be very honest and sincere with ourselves, there's a whole lot of export that is happening locally. Things are moving out and going foreign direct foreign exchange also coming in for Nigeria. All we just need to do is to scale up productivity. The more productive we become in terms of having to create good quality products that can access global market, the more of the foreigns that will come in. But what you see here is the fact that our products and services must be top notch, that they become acceptable in the international market. Take, for example, we need researchers to work on our cassava because, as we speak, for example, today, Nigeria is the biggest producer of cassava globally. We can leverage that market. We have a lot of people who is going to eat gari in London, but the government of London will not allow gari to enter in there because of perceived cyanide in it. So we need our research institute to work on this to see how to reduce the cyanide in our cassava, so that, of course, when we fry it, we can take it to these economies. Now, of course, how do we also create structures and put resource into the processing of cassava here, so that we can also get extracts from cassava, that apart from the fufu and the eba that we see from it on a daily basis, we can also begin to see starch, which is one universal product that is as expensive as possible. And if that is all we are going to leverage, and government is going to encourage people to do cassava farming for export or for extract of starch, which of course all pharmaceutical companies need, and we will have a whole lot of inflows of foreign exchange. So that value chain, we need to see how we can put some investment in it, so we can sell something outside and they can buy from us, because at least we have comparative cost advantage in terms of cassava production.
Now, this investment or this fund is also to bring Nigerians in the diaspora to take to philanthropy. What would you recommend? Everybody doing their thing, or form a cooperative towards a particular cause? Which would be more effective?
Well, I think cooperative may further engender bureaucracy in terms of the flow. When people talk about philanthropy, is to see that we can also see how to help people at home. They said, if in a family only one person is prosperous, it's poverty. So if I am blessed, for example, and I have siblings who are doing nothing, I can also invest in them to become productive, not necessarily by giving them handouts. I can start a small business for them. That's a form of philanthropy. And this, of course, will further increase productivity in our environment. And then we can take a lot of people away from the unemployment market, take away people from crime, and take away people from poverty. So it's not just what government alone can do. Individual can also intervene in some of all these areas. Set up people who finish school and they need just some equipment to start a business. Maybe it's a generator or a clipper they need. And then, of course, you can help them. And if this kind of philanthropy comes into the environment, you can only create communal prosperity. And I think that is why that appeal for me makes sense, really.
All right, we'll just have to leave the conversation here. Let's hope that the $10 billion the federal government aims to, source from Nigerians in diaspora will be something to go by. And with this way, let's hope we've been able to shape this policy. Idahosa, we must thank you for your time and your thoughts on this development.
Good Nigeria family.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.